All right. Well, we're starting a brand new relationship series this morning. And I know whenever I say that, there's some of you who are like, man, I am so hyped about this. I love everything relationships. And some of you are like, dude, can you please talk about literally anything else on planet Earth? Right. Some of us, it's like, you're like relationship and you're like, that's your thing. And if you're really excited about this series, there's probably a problem with you. Just want to say that. Because you're like, yeah, come on, relationships. It's like, okay, that's a little bit eager beaver. I get it. For some of you, again, like, this, like, conjures up a lot of thoughts and a lot of like, oh, please don't remind me that I need a relationship because my mom reminds me, my dad reminds me, my grandma reminds me. In fact, every time I get around my family, they say, are you dating anybody yet? And I say, would you get a life? Right? You're trying to think of like what's like the most like kind, honoring thing that you can ask. Or you're engaged, right? And relationships are interesting to you. In the fun thing of like engaged and newly married, and it's like you don't know. People can tell you like this is what marriage is like, right? This is what you need to prepare for. Oh man, there's these incredible things, there's incredibly difficult things, and you're like, yeah. And all you know is it's something, but since you haven't been in that covenantal relationship at this point, you don't really know what you're preparing for because you haven't really been there. It's kind of like when you have a baby and people put a bunch of stuff on a gift registry. And you're sitting there thinking, man, I don't think we need this many towels, right? I don't think we need this many wipes. You do, okay? I just want you to know that. You absolutely do. Or you're married, and you're sitting there, and you're thinking, okay, you kind of have a spectrum of marriages. Some marriages are good, some marriages are difficult, some marriages are we married or are we roommates, right? And you just don't want to be reminded of that. But what I think is important about this is marriage, or going towards marriage. This is for everybody. This is for people who are single, people who are dating, people who are engaged, people who are married, people who are looking to get married at some point. Some of you, you're not looking to get married at any point. That's fine. You know someone who at some point is going to talk to you about their marriage, and they're going to say, oh my gosh, I just need to tell somebody. And hopefully what we're going to talk about over the next couple weeks is going to be helpful for you, because we all, or at least most of us, look for some version of the one. And so I wanted to make today accessible by telling you kind of a funny story that happened where I wasn't looking for the one, but my daughter was. And that sounds ridiculous because she's 6, and this happened a number of years ago. But we used to have this Sunday tradition where before Rose was born, she was, I think, about 2, or maybe he was just born, and we would always go to the Publix together. We'd always go to the grocery store. This is before Instacart. Well, it was probably around, but we probably were just more active, right? So we would go to Publix every Sunday, and we would get the week's worth of groceries, whatever we were getting. So I got all the groceries, put them all in the cart, and she's in this little, the carrier seat, which kids, for some reason, they love until they get a little bit older and they want to sit in the actual basket, and it's like, no, you're a grown-up. You're not going to do that. And so we had done all the shopping, and we were in line. I'm 38 right now. It's probably happened 4 or 5 years ago, so I was, 33, 34 at the time. And something you need to know about me is well, you know this about me. I'm up in front of a lot of people, right? And so there's a lot of times where I'm just aware and conscious of the fact that I don't know who's aware and conscious of me. And so we're at Publix, and if you also know our church, which you're here, so you at least have a baseline familiarity of this morning, we have a lot of young people at our church, which I love, and I love the fact that we get to speak into the voice of the next generation. But this one particular day, it wasn't an advantage, because we're in line, we're at Publix, we're about to check out, and right behind us, there's this, a little bit younger than me girl. She's about probably 24, 25, somewhere in the neighborhood, right? And so I'm just, focused. Here's my groceries. Here's what's going on. Ava's in the cart as I'm unloading stuff. And you know how the cart looks back, or the seat for the kids look backwards? And Ava turns around to this wonderful young lady and looks at her dead in the eyes. At 2 years old, she's just barely learned to talk at this point. I have no clue where she got this from. She looks back and she goes, "Are you my mommy?" I was like, whoa, Abe, Abe, I'm a pastor. You can't ask that question. Like, you have a mommy. You know you have a mommy. What has mommy been telling you, But I say that to say, there's this thing that we have that we're looking for somebody, we're looking for something, right? And a lot of times, as it relates to relationships, we're looking for the person or for the one, and you can define that however you want to. It's the one that you choose. It's the one that God has for you. It's some of you believe that there's only one. I'd say that's probably not right, but that's fine. Well, hopefully there is one, but it's the one that you choose. But the entire series that revolves around this idea of who you marry and how you get married and what you are to do in dating and singleness and engagingness and marriage, or just being a person that knows a lot of people who are in that category, what you would say or do to help people to have happy marriages. And here's why I'm actually really passionate about this content. The predominant thing, the predominant entity that will drive happiness in your life is the person who you spend your life with. The primary person or the primary driver of relational and just life happiness is the marriage that you engage in. And unfortunately, and you know the statistics, there's not a lot of marriages that survive. And of those that do survive, there's not a lot that we would identify as happy. Some of us, you came from a background like my background, which was a broken background, which I don't know anywhere in our family line that we actually saw a marriage survive. And the ones that do, if that's what marriage is like, I don't know if I even want to be married. And for some of you, that's your story. And in fact, for some of you, that's why you don't want to get married. And that's fine. But my thought is that we need to make that decision from a place of health, because for many of us, the model that we've seen, it's honestly just not that great. And so today is going to be the launching off point into the conversation over the next couple of weeks that we're going to have about this. And I want to start off with what I think is the biggest myth. We had that video, and the reason I love that is it's because it's always like, are you the one? Are you the one? Are you the one? Are you the one? And well, I think that's an interesting question. I think there's a myth around that. It's called the right person myth. And to be truthful, when I'm looking at a relationship series, I have my own thoughts and I have my own opinions, but I ask a lot of questions to a lot of people, a lot of different stages of advice, because when I was around, people, there was not online dating, right? You didn't have an app. You couldn't swipe left, couldn't swipe right. If you're a millennial, I heard this statistic the other day. This is wild to me. Half of your friends who are in relationships are in a relationship that they met someone else who's online. If you're over 35, you're like, that is insanity, right? If you're under 35, you're like, dude, what am I going to do? Walk up to her in a bar and say hi? Which I'd say, let's talk about you being at a bar, Just kidding. What am I going to do? Walk up to her at Bible study and say hi, right? Yes, that's what you should do. Anyways, so I just kind of surveyed a bunch of different things. I honestly consumed a bunch of different content about what are other people saying about marriage, people who have been around longer, people who have been married for longer, and things like that. And so half of this content is just kind of cut and pasted. Ooh, that's a good point. That's a good idea. That's a good thought. So if at some point you listen to another marriage or relationship series and you're like, I heard that before, there's a good chance that you did hear that before. You heard it from me before you heard it from them. So just remember that, okay? But there's this myth that gets perpetuated. And it's basically the right person myth. The right person myth essentially goes like this. When I find the right person, everything will be all right. When I find the right person, everything will be all right. When I find the right person, and here's how we kind of parse this out. When I find the right person who perfectly complements my deficiencies with their strengths, and my strengths complement their deficiencies, and we're going to come together, and it's going to be like that third grade best friend necklace that you and your best friend had, right? And just like the edges of the jagged pieces lined up in just such a perfect way, that you're like, oh, you're my best friend. And you're like, I don't really remember their name anymore because we're much older now, right? But it's this idea in relationships that if I find the right person, everything will be all right. And I just need to find the right person. And so you date, and you're looking for the right person. And as you date them, you're thinking, I think they're the right person, but how do you actually know that they're the right person? And so you have a lot of concreteness, and generally in my experience, it kind of goes one of two ways. There's the person that knows immediately, and if that's you, you are not me, right? You are the person who it's like, man, I just knew after 5 minutes that they were the one. I'm like, you are just thirsty. That's all that is, right? Like you, good. I just knew. It's like you just knew they were attractive. That's all you knew. And there's some of us who were the other way. It takes us a long time. And it's not that the person has a deficiency. For me, before we got married, in fact, I just want to tell you something. I'm really hoping, I'm praying, I've asked, so you can pray for my marriage, because I currently trying to convince my wife, and so I'm creating public consensus around this idea that I want her to give the last sermon of this series with me on stage. And I actually want to do a... Okay, she's not at this service, so you guys just keep that on hush, or I'm going to get in big trouble, okay? I'm serious. I'm going to be mad at you guys. For me, it was this idea of man, I am going to wake up. Some of you, this is you, commitment phobe, whatever. I just call it realism. I'm going to wake up next to this person every day for the rest of my life. Until one of us dies, and statistically being the guy, I'm probably dying first. I do a lot more dumb stuff than she does, right? So until I die, I am waking up next to this person. I'm I don't know many people that I like that much, right? And I might like you now, but 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now. But you date, hoping that it's the right person. You hoping that's the right person. And at first in a relationship, man, there's, all the love songs that you've ever heard make sense. And you hear this country song and you're I never liked country music until now. And it said this thing. And I think he was talking about his dog in his truck, but it said something about love and his girl. And I feel that, And then you walk down the aisle, and my favorite is when everybody says, I do, which I think is fun because it's not really I do, it's just really an I hope to, right? People walk down every Saturday or Friday or Thursday or whatever day of the week that people get married on these days, and they walk down, and they say, I do. And for you who are married, you know this. When you see people walk down the aisle and say, I do, we celebrate that, but what they're really saying is, I hope to. I intend to. I want to. Ideally, that sounds good to me, but until you're actually in the situation, you don't know that you can, but we commit to. And then, at some point, trouble starts. And perhaps trouble's been there the entire time, but you overlooked it, you didn't really think about it. You kind of minimized it, pushed it to the side. And after a while, it gets difficult, and it gets tough. And that euphoria that began in the relationship begins to kind of wane and dissipate as it goes on. Until eventually you don't feel what you felt before, and you don't know if you can ever feel that again. And this is how I think about my marriage, and it's just really difficult, and it's a struggle, and it just seems like we're not on the same page, and it's constant conflict. And I feel like I wake up every morning, and I feel like I go to bed every night, and I'm next to this person, but I feel like I'm on an island. And then married couples make an incredibly dumb decision. We say, you know what? Two of us is difficult enough. I know what's gonna save our marriage. Let's have a baby, right? And so let's take an already difficult, already contentious, already, friction-filled relationship. And let's now sleep deprive ourselves, financially strap ourselves, and commit ourselves for the next 18 years, or for many of you, the next 25 years, right? For a long time, I'm just going to say, I am responsible for this person. And everybody who in here is single is thinking that's so ridiculous. And everybody who's married is looking forward You know what oftentimes happens is, in the middle of that, and then you see somebody at work, somebody at the gym, somebody that makes you feel alive again. And here's what we think. Maybe they weren't the right one. Maybe they're the right one. You see somebody from high school that you haven't seen in a while. Maybe they're the right one. In fact, we always had this thing, and we never got there, and the timing never worked out, and she was in and I was in, or he was in and I was in, and we never actually synced up at the same time, but it always seemed like there was something there. And one step after the next, it happens all the time that maybe this person is the one. And for some of us, you just continue on a marriage, convinced that you're going to be miserable forever because you picked the wrong one. For some of us, we leave marriage. But there's a few people who I think know a couple of key things, and whether they've ever articulated them in principle form or they just intuitively live them out. The people who have happy marriages. I think there's this myth that the right person myth or the right one myth says, I'm going to find the right one. And so we decided to call this series, Are You the One? Are you the one? Are you the one? That's the question we're asking. How do I know that they're the one? But here's the question that I think is far more important. It's the premise of this entire series. Let me give you kind of the bottom line of the series if you're going to check over the next 3 or 4 weeks. Here's the question. We always ask, are you the one? But the question I'm asking is, are you the one? In other words, are you the one that the person you're looking for is looking for? We love to think about, okay, who's the person that I'm looking for? But let me tell you a little secret about marriages. I don't believe in marriage problems. Now, that's a hot take, I get it. Marriage problems, I do believe them, they're just minimized. Marriage problems are stuff like, where do you put the toilet paper? Over or under, right? Did you use my toothbrush, you weirdo, right? Did you hang your towel up? Those are marriage problems. But what we experience is single people problems or just people problems that we bring into marriage. And the key driver behind great marriages is not finding the one, but being the one. And so this entire series aims not at saying, who is the one? Are you 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 the one? The simple idea behind this thing is saying, are you the one? Are you the one that you're looking for is looking for? Are you the person that you're looking for is looking for? In other words, if you found the right person, would you be the one that one is looking for and wants? Because the Bible says very little about who to find, but it says a whole lot about who to be. And when we are, oftentimes we find that which we are. In other words, healthy people generally find healthy people. People who operate from a place of self, where self is healthy emotionally, spiritually, we find people who are healthy emotionally and spiritually. And so the premise of this series sounds like it's, are you the one? Are you the one? Are you the one? Are you the one? But it's really asking, are you the one? And I want to go to a section of verses this morning that they become like the constant and the consistent marriage verses. But I think there's something in this. And we're going to be in 1 Corinthians 13. So everybody who's like, man, what's the most typical relationship thing that we could do? 100% it, okay? Just want to go ahead and get this out of the way week 1 so we can kind of move on to the next thing. But here's why I want to do this. Because in this, what Paul is giving to the church at Corinth, he just talked about a bunch of spiritual gifts. So Paul, who for a long time didn't like Jesus, was opposed to Jesus, persecuted the church, has this interaction or this encounter where he experiences Jesus, life radically transformed and turned around. After a period of time, he begins going around preaching the gospel, planting churches. When that happens, he would write letters to different places and different churches. He's writing to a place called Corinth, which was notoriously sinful. They were notoriously wild, and they were notoriously crazy. It's like kind of Vegas or the local version of like, I don't know, College Town, Recess, right? Some of y'all have been in that pool, and that's the problem. You're like, are they the one? No. I just want you to know that. And so Paul is writing in 1 Corinthians 13 to this audience that he just got done talking about spiritual gifts, but he says, okay, so all this spirituality, all this spiritual gift stuff is important, but let me tell you, he ends chapter 12 with, let me tell you about it in a more excellent way. And he begins this kind of diatribe about what love is and how love is important. He basically says at the beginning of 13, man, if I can understand all the mysteries of God, if I can speak in the tongues of angels, if I can do all this, if I can give everything I have to the poor, if I myself am burned at the stake and have not love, all of that is pointless and purposeless. You got your Bible, it's 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and we're going to start at verse 4. It says this. It says, love, in case what you're looking for, is patient, and love is kind. Love is patient and kind. And as we're going through this, and some of you've heard this before, but I think it's important. As he's describing love, God, who is described as love, whom we are supposed to mirror and emulate, meaning these things describe God, but they ought to describe us as well. And so you can just go ahead and take out love, and you can put in your name and say, do these things, do these descriptors, do they describe me? So he says, number one, love is patient and kind. Now I know for all the guys in here, you're like, man, I really was hoping somebody would define me as patient and kind, right? There's this, I think, over-heightened sense of masculinity where we're like, kind. I'm not kind, I'm aggressive. It's like, all right, grow up. Here's why I love this. The first two things he says, these are two things, if you're looking for who to be, if you're looking for what love is, if you're looking for what to define yourself as, this is what love actually looks like. And they're all actually says, first off, love is patient. Love is patient. You know what patience means? Patience means I am going to wait, I am going to delay, I am going to not get mad, frustrated, or angry, even though I have a lot of reason to. We love to think about being patient when no patience is required, right? But patience is only patient when you need to be patient. Now I don't think anybody in here is like, what? I never thought about that. But isn't that interesting? Love defers in patience and does not rush. Love says, yeah, of course, I'm going to be patient in the parking lot. I'm going to be patient in traffic. Be patient at my job. But patience is also someone who that they know that they could rush things. They don't pressure the other person. They don't push the other person. They wait for the other person. They delay for the other person. Love, it says, is patient when patience is required. Second thing is love is kind. And again, I know everybody in here is like, man, I just want to be, people call me kind, and I'm like, oh, bring on the praise. Kindness is, these words are not, they're not descriptive words, they're action words. These words specifically, they are an action. So it says, man, this is what a patient person does. A patient person is this. Love, a person like this, you are kind. Kind, basically understood in its original context, means this. It means that you are the person who sees other people's needs and doesn't just feel a sense of generosity, but actually acts generously towards the other person. First two things he describes. Love defers me to the benefit of you. Love defers me to the benefit of you. Love says, there's a reason for me not to be patient because this person is frustrating me, but I'm going to choose to be patient anyways. Love says, I don't necessarily need to be gracious towards you. I don't necessarily need to be generous towards you, but I am going to be generous towards you anyway. Goes on. Here's a list of things love isn't. It is not arrogant or rude. In other words, it's not about this sense of, oh, I'm sorry, I missed a couple. Love does not envy or boast. And the second one is kind of the reciprocal of that. It is not arrogant or rude. So love doesn't say, I'm going to be envious of what you have, but it also doesn't say, I'm going to boast in what I have. Now, pause. We are only envious of the things that we want. We are only ever envious of the things that we want. So love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy or boast. We're envious, so that means when the person who gets engaged, and you have always wanted to get engaged for a long time, and you aren't engaged, in fact, you're not even dating yet, and you feel a sense of envious, it says that's not loving. At the other side of it, it says love does not boast. Love doesn't say, if one side of it's envious, the other side of it's boastfulness or pridefulness, which says, look at what I have. Because there's nothing that I should say, that's what you have, that's what I want, or this is what I have, shouldn't you want it? Because that, again, is all about self. Now, let me pause here and say this. I don't know, whenever I'm talking, whenever I'm communicating, there's a level of this that is understood through a certain context or framework, right? This is understood for most of us as we read. We're like, okay, 1 Corinthians 13, this is what love is. This is what love looks like. This is what a relationship looks like. Here's what you need to know. Nowhere in this does Paul say marriage. Nowhere in this does Paul say, in these thoughts, these ideas, these adjectives, these verbs are specific and isolated towards a romantic relationship. The question is not, are you this person? Are you this person to the person whom you love? The question is, are you this person to everyone whom you meet? We want to say, oh, yeah, this is what love looks like. And, in a marriage, love is patient, and love is kind, and love does not envy, it does not boast. Except for the person that has what you want. Are you patient? Are you kind to people who don't deserve patience and kindness and whom you might never meet again or see again? In other words, these things are to describe us all the time in every relationship, not just some of the time in a specific relationship. So let me ask you this question. Are you patient? Are you kind? Do you push people? Do you rush people? Are you generous and charitable towards people? Putting a thought of care and compassion into action. Are you envious? Or do you want people to see how cool you are? And a lot of us like to think no. But I think there's a lot of social media that says yes. Right? I don't know a lot of people who are like, man, I'm going to post like the worst possible picture of my kids online, right? I'm going to, like mid-tantrum, when they're just like gross crying and there's food everywhere and the dog has just destroyed the house, and I'm going to be like, yeah, you guys should want this life right now. It said it is not arrogant or rude. This is great advice in general, but this is incredible marriage advice right here. It does not insist on its own way. Now we look for the other person. Some of you are thinking to your spouse, like, see? Let me ask you this, married folks in the room. How different would our marriages be if we just heard that? Like, how different would our marriages be if we just listened to that? And I'm saying this, and part of why I don't want my wife to preach the last sermon with me is I feel like she's going to go back and like revise like all of the content that I presented so far. Like, remember when Ben said it does not insist on its own way? Let me tell you about what happened this week, right? So I say this as someone who I do not speak to this with great or perfect moral authority by any means. But this is the thing that I'm sitting there looking and saying, okay, am I these things in the heat of the argument, in the heat of the conflict, in the heat of the thing? Am I this person? Let me just say this. You want to know how, I think great couples have conflict. I think because it creates clarity and honesty and communication. But when we're in conflict, am I saying this because I want my way, or because I'm afraid that if you don't understand where I'm coming from, you'll think that I don't love you, but I was actually trying to be considerate of you, or oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I did that wrong. Right? Half the time for us, it's not I want you to know because you're wrong. It's I understand where you're coming from. And I would probably feel the same way. But I want you to know where I'm coming from, not because I want you to believe my way and think my way and do my way. It's because I don't want you to think I wasn't being considerate of you and that I don't love you. So that's at its best. So don't be like, oh my gosh, the Kempers are awesome. But the question again is this. Is this how we are? With everyone from the friend to the roommate to the waitress to the person on the side of the road to our boss to your employees to the person in your internship program to the person in your class to your professor, does this describe us? It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. I think about that like, even in the morning before I've finished my cup of coffee, right? It says it is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with truth. It doesn't rejoice when I said that you shouldn't do that and I said we should do my way and then we did it your way and then you got it wrong and I'm just like, I'm not saying I told you so, but by not saying I told you so, I'm telling you I told you so, right? It says, no, it doesn't rejoice in that. It rejoices with truth. And he kind of shotguns this last part. And he says, this is what love does. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So here's again the question. Does this describe you? Does this describe you? Does it describe me? Because the truth is again, we look for this in other people, but we rarely evaluate ourselves by this criteria. And here's the beautiful part about why this is not just like, oh, this is just good life advice. This is just good, you should be a good person. I think, honestly, if you do this stuff, this will make you a good person. I honestly think that this will make you better at life. Not that God's like, oh, I just want to make your life better. But if you have this kind of an employee, they're not getting fired, right? If you have this kind of a person that works for your organization, they will probably be a good, successful person because they are not about themselves. They will deny themselves to the benefit of the organization. They'll do what's right to help other people in the organization, and they'll also want to do their job really well. Like, this is just good life advice. But the beautiful part about this is that when we see this, what we actually see is a picture of who Jesus is. So we don't do this from a narrative void thinking, I have never had a model of this. Because for us, if we're being honest, that's one of the biggest difficulties when it comes to marriage, is that we have been around people who have been married who oftentimes don't have successful marriages, or their marriage didn't last, or at least the marriage isn't happy. And so we're sitting there saying, man, I don't know if I got a fighting chance at this, because every single model that I've seen, I would like to be that, but I've never actually seen that play out in a relationship. We have the model of Jesus. We have the model of Jesus, who is patient with us when we were in rebellion in our sin, who was overwhelmingly kind to us, that because of the rebellion that our sin was and is, there was a massive gap between us, and he not only saw and had compassion on us, he acted charitably to us by God sending his son, and his name is Jesus. So we do this out of the overflow of what we see and who God is. You know, you can go on. All of these things describe it's not patient. It is patient. It's kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. You know, Philippians talks about this, how he, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped or something to be leveraged, but instead made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. It's not arrogant or it's not rude. It does not insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoings. Jesus is like, man, I'm so hyped the disciples got that one wrong, right? You numbskulls. I don't know when the last time I said the word numbskull is, by the way, but it felt appropriate right there. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Jesus loved all of us. In fact, so much that he believes in all of us, he hopes in all of us, endures all of us and all of our rebellion, and he sent his son to the cross for us. So as we're looking at this, I just want you to know, this is not us trying to be some supernatural, heroic, relational person. This is us simply being a disciple. Us simply being like Jesus. And so I don't know where everybody is in here relationally. But here's what I do know. In relationships, there is an incredible tendency to look for that, to hope for that in the other person. But let me tell you this. You can't control the other person. All you can control is you. All you can control is your attitude and your actions. Your attitude and your effort. So here's the question. Are you the one? Are you the one? And let's say that you walked in and you were at the Bible study and you went to the community group and everybody was around and he was there or she was there and somehow this light was shining down, kind of like this light shining down, right? And you're like, oh my gosh. And you all of a sudden heard angels start to flap above their head and you're like, I think this is the one, right? And you're praying for them and you see them worshiping. You're like, oh my gosh, and they worshiped. It's like, well, worship isn't a song, it's a lifestyle. But that's a different sermon for a different day. But right, And I saw this person and they were this. But here's the question. In all honesty, and this is not me being judgmental, this is how I have to evaluate myself. This is how we all have to think about this. If that person walked into your life tomorrow, are you the person that person would be looking for? Because for many of us in a spiritual frame, we have one foot in the world and one foot in God, and we're so in the middle. If we met that person, we would not be this person. And because of that, there's a good chance that person would not think that we are the one. This isn't to say that this is all your fault if you're single. This isn't to say it's all your fault if you're in marriage. And you can look at it and say, yeah, but what about this person? What about that person? What about what they did? And if you knew my story, and let me tell you, you're probably right. You're probably right. You probably have a story that if I heard and if we sat down and had coffee, I'd say, holy cow, I can't believe that's incredible. I don't know how you're a functioning adult with, your story and your history. But here's what I do know. The right one, finding the right one is a myth. Being the right one is not. Now there's a lot of wrong out there, but there's a lot of right too. And I'm convinced of this. I cannot expect you, if you're married, I cannot expect you to be the one if I'm not the one. I cannot expect you to act like the one if I'm not first acting like the one. I cannot hold you to a standard or to an ideal or to a framework that I myself am not willing to understand and embody. And if you are not married yet, I cannot tell you this more emphatically. Healthy people who embody this, who are patient, people who are kind, people who are not envious, they're not boastful, they're not arrogant, they're not prideful. They believe all things, they hope all things, they are love. If you are like that, let me tell you, healthy people find healthy people. Healthy people find healthy people. Loving people find people who are loving. And you want to know the best way. This is just advice if you're dating. You want to know the best way to find out if the person that you're dating is this type of a person? Because all this is, well, hold on. This is a lot about the other person, and if I'm all about this other person, then there's a really good chance, and I have a history and a track record of when I'm about the other person, it's all about that other person, and that person just thinks our relationship is all about them, and it just feels like I get walked over. You know why this is so important for you? The only way to find out if they are that person is to do that with them. The only way to find out if they are that person is as you are dating, start to embody this. In fact, again, you should embody this in every characteristic of your life. And if when they see that and they experience that and they feel that and they say, you know what, it is right about me, let me tell you what you should do. Break up with them immediately. Because and I say that with all the love of my heart, can you imagine waking up next to that for 25 years? That sounds like torture. But can you imagine waking up next to somebody who they're patient, kind, and they're not envious, they're not boastful, they're not arrogant, they don't insist on having their own way. When you see someone who embodies this, you see someone who is like Jesus and what Jesus embodied for us, I'm telling you, you will begin to become the person that you're looking for. So here's the only thing I want you to think about walking away from this sermon. Are you the one? Are you the one? Does this describe you in every area, in every facet of life, or at least progressively working towards? Because if it doesn't, it doesn't matter what the other person is, because you're going to be there, and you're not the one. But you have a God who so loved you, who so believed in you, who so hoped in you, who was so kind to you and to me, that he gave his one and only Son. And so when we live into this, we live towards God and towards Jesus. Are you the one? Let's pray. God, I pray that you would make us into a group of people who lives this out. You would make us into a group of people who lives us out in the day-to-day of our lives. You would make us into a group of people, us into a group of people who were defined and described by love. That this 1 Corinthians 13 idea wouldn't be a caveat towards romantic relationships specifically, but this would define every interaction that we have. This would define every experience that we have, every relationship that we have, that we are patient, that we are kind, that we are not envious, that we're not boastful, that we're not arrogant, that we don't insist on our own way, that we love all, we hope all, we believe all, we sacrifice towards all. That this would be true of us in every area of our life. And God, when we do that, I pray that you would make us into your people, disciples of you, people who want to be like you, love like you, look like you, and be Jesus as best as we can as your Spirit empowers us. God, knowing that we don't do this out of a devoid of the model or out of a void of the model, we do this out of the abundance and the overflow of the love that you displayed for us, most pointedly and specifically on the cross. Help us to be the one. Help us to embody this. And I pray that whatever place and area and stage of life, single, dating, engaged, married for the second time, third time, you would call each and every one of us to be like you, to live like you, to love like you. And that this would define our existence so that when it comes to our marriage, that would just be an overflow of who we already are. I pray that you would make us, through the power of your word and your Spirit, the one. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.